Okay, welcome everybody to the board budget workshop. Make sure your microphones are on and phones are on stun. It's Tuesday, June 19th, 1 p.m. Call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Rebecca, could you take roll?
Present.
Here? Here?
Here.
Here. Item number 2 on our agenda is public comment. At this time, members of the public may address the board on any non-agendized items. The public is encouraged to work through staff to place items on the agenda for board consideration. No action can be taken on matters not listed on the agenda. Comments are limited to 5 minutes per person. Any public comment? Seeing none, go to item 3, our budget workshop. This is a discussion regarding the fiscal year 2018-19 preliminary budget. Fiscal year starts July 1st, 2018. Jeffrey Meyer.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, members of the board. I'll try to make this brief, not quite Steve Hutchings style, but I'll make it as brief as possible. I do need to let you know that the budget package in front of you has been updated. There have been a couple changes since the budget agenda package went out, and I'll explain those in just a moment. They're minor changes. They no significant additions or subtractions to the budget, just some allocation issues and some accounting for PERS costs. Today we're going to talk about the budget process, go over this. I can make it faster since there really isn't much of a public here anymore, so I'll just kind of hit the highlights. There were some adjustments. I'll talk about that. The revenues, which we talked about last time, rates, property taxes, transfers in. The expenditure side, some of the ongoing challenges, and then we're going to talk about our capital improvement program. There really isn't anything new on this slide about the budget process. The only thing I want to remind the board is there's no funding for any new positions. We have 65 FTE or full-time equivalent positions. As I mentioned last week, I do not see any opportunity to add additional bodies except for possibly one engineer whose costs can be covered by the R&R and capital improvement program. And we need to look at 60 to 70% of cost recovery of that. Engineers from the private world are always used to charging projects because that's how they keep track of expenses. That is our only funding source. Rates and revenues, rate revenues and such are not enough to be able to cover these positions at this time. If we want to make any changes in reallocating resources or providing more resources maybe in the field or somewhere else, there's going to have to be a net zero balance on the FTE count. Meaning, if you need to add here, you got to subtract here. There's not enough money over the next 5 years to add bodies.
So what is the general manager's plan? I mean, I still have the position that we're going to need to add, a couple field guys, particularly on the ramp up. If we ramp up on the engineering side, we're obviously going to have to ramp up on the construction side, or inspection side or something. So is there, are we anticipating doing a review of the current staff levels and then perhaps with retirements replacing, one department with perhaps somebody from the field, or what is the thought process on that?
You bet, Director Davidson, that's exactly what we're looking at is we talked about, have been talking about for the last year on how do we, we obviously have staffing needs in the field. We have areas where we know we need to be able to allocate more of our staffing resources to. But the way that we're going to have to do it, and again, we didn't obviously get the additional positions that would have been in an ideal world, but the way we'll have to make it work is to use positions as people retire, and looking at every one of those and how we can recalibrate them, and then also looking at how we staff all of our functions across the district internally and in the field. So, and that's, again, we'll just have to come up with the best solution we can within the financial means that we have.
I know that you had identified over 10 or 11 within the next 5 years. Is the number that big?
It's more than that. It's, well, eligible for retirement is
Right.
half of the workforce within 5 years. You know, we've already started to see some of our, you know, most senior people, experienced people that are retiring out right now. So with that, you know, that creates an opportunity. I mean, that could be a position, probably is a position, a higher paid position, higher level of responsibility. Can we recalibrate that maybe more to an entry-level position where we have more hands, you know, on the projects, more people working on, you know, doing the labor for the projects that we need assistance with? Can we use that position more wisely instead of paying someone at that, in that capacity? Could we instead use that for a different position, combined maybe with another position that's opening up? Can we create, you know, can we make some changes working within the headcount we have, but making sure that we allocate, again, the number of staff that we have as best as we can to the needs? So that's one of the things we're looking to do is to assess really what are the staffing needs. So really understanding where the shortfall in staffing is, and how, you know, at least knowing that where the highest priority areas are, and so that we can hopefully utilize some of these you know, some of these open positions to, again, recalibrate them to best, you know, help with that.
Is there any opportunity to have, you know, like, you know, entry-level internships, you know, summer internships, and, you know, I don't know what that, I mean, when we take somebody like that on, do we have to take the full responsibility for retire and benefits and everything, or, you know, because I mean, what I really want to do, I mean, what I really like to see is, you know, somebody that's, you know, qualified to operate a D1, you know, and out there to help these guys.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because, you know, that's really what I believe we need, is somebody that can, you know, can backfill and do things that, you know, take care of our facilities and stuff like that, and take some of the pressure off these guys. But I'm just curious if have we thought of that, and then what are the responsibilities, you know, is in regards to the SEIU and
Yeah.
all of that. I mean,
Yeah, that's, I mean, something we definitely can take a look at and talk about. I think at one time we did have, you know, at least summer help. It's if you're doing an internship, there are certain requirements that you make sure that you do provide them with an experience that, well, well, I guess it depends if it's an unpaid or paid internship, and what, you know, what you're allocating them for. If it's an unpaid internship, I know you have to give them a broad range of experiences so that it's more
I
educational
would
and
assume it would be
in nature.
a lower paid internship, but I just don't know what our ability to do that. I mean, you know, we can get somebody out there for $20 an hour or something like that.
Mhm.
You know, that could give them, you know, the summertime relief, and, you know,
Yeah.
it might be an opportunity, so.
I have
And there's-
two things. Along those lines, at one point, we were talking about Delta College. Remember, they were going to do something with us and possibly give us some
With
help
the
in
water program
water.
at Columbia College, I think is what you're referring to.
Delta or
Yeah.
Columbia,
Yeah,
wherever.
yeah.
And that is something that we have done in the past, and had OITs, you know, operators in training type staff. But the challenge with that is you have to make sure you have enough supervision over their work, and that can sometimes lead to additional hours for staff to have to be available and present for that. So that doesn't necessarily, and we've evaluated that in the last few years, and it just didn't prove to be the best option for us. But you know, again, if there's any and all options like that, we need to revisit them all. I mean, if there's something we can use that does help, yeah, we want to do
And
it.
the second point I want to make is, we're in the midst of job classification, or
Compensation
call it?
study, yes.
Yeah, and so we want to make sure that whatever we do, we don't create a new person or a new title or whatever.
Yeah, we'll be working within the positions we have, you bet.
And just to follow up on one of your questions, Director Davidson, we do have 2 inspectors actually working now, who can follow up and inspect the projects as capital R&R projects, as CIP projects. So we're covered in that area. So if we bulk up on engineering to be able to put these projects out, it's going to be a combination, whether we are both internal staff, and we are going to have to contract out to some external companies to be able to do some of these jobs to keep them moving. Because unfortunately, things happen in the field where you get breaks or emergencies that will draw our staff off of doing a project, and that can delay that project implementation. Whereas if you hire outside contractors and be judicious about it, we can roll out these projects, have them inspected by inspectors, meet our requirements, and read our specifications, and then have them complete.
My main focus is, I want to see whatever we can do to get some help on the leak repair. It's
Yes.
by far and away the largest complaint that we get, whether it's a public relations issue or not. I mean, I realize we're not gonna run out of water, but it is, without question right now, that's our biggest, in my district in particular, it's literally the only thing I hear, but I hear about it all the time.
And it's high on my list as well. One of the things we included in the budget this year is a specific piece of equipment to assist and make leak repairs faster for crews. So that is an area that we're going to be looking at and has risen to the top.
All right, great, thanks.
When you talk about there are 65 full-time equivalents, those are all filled positions. We have no unfilled.
We have three vacant positions at this point, I believe. Actually, 2 and 1 that's upcoming due to a retirement. Is that true?
Let's see, I'm trying to recall what, one is the, within the management of operations, the director position.
Director of Utilities, Director of Operations. We had Danny Burton retired, and they've interviewed and are in the process for filling that position, and another individual is retiring, I think, at the end of this month. So those are the 3 positions.
Okay. So is Danny Burton's position one that we're gonna try to fill from internally, or is it, I mean, he was a pretty all-around, he could do everything, so where are we gonna find a replacement for him?
Well, in Director Thomas, we did do an internal recruitment, and we had several candidates apply, and we're about to finish that process right now. Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
Okay. There were some changes from the paperwork that I provided to you in the budget package, as well as the preliminary that I showed you last week. The 2 biggest changes had to do with PERS benefits. One is having to do with 2 new employees, and this was my fault. We offer 3 different PERS retirement packages based on your data hire and if you have prior PERS service. The people that the 2 new employees replaced were under the miscellaneous, the old 2.7 at 55. I didn't update the formulas to 2% at 62, which is the new package that is available to new hires. That's the only one we can do based on state law and PEPRA. So in doing that, I came up with a savings of about $7,800. I decided to plow that back into the water resources budget, and I'll get to that in just a moment. I also took a look at how we allocate the PERS unfunded accrued liability. PERS costs come into 2 components. One's the normal cost, which is a percentage based on actual payroll. The other is an unfunded accrued liability, which is basically, oops, we didn't get enough money in the past year, so we have to carry it forward. We're spreading out the cost. That's about $545,000. I was allocating it, they used to lump it all together. Now they're separating it apart. And I used to allocate it based on a percentage of the individual salary to the overall salary, sort of like we do for the other. However, what I decided to take a look at further is allocate it based on the PERS unit they are in, the benefit class, because there's different formulas for unfunded liability for 2% at 55, 2% at 60, and 2% at 62. Since 2% at 60 and 2% at 62 are fairly new programs, the unfunded liability combined is a little over 2,000. The rest of it falls on 2.7 at 55. So I did it by percentage. You'll see some changes, sometimes radical changes in departmental budgets based on what you saw previously. Bottom line, it doesn't change. It's just how we reallocated that. The extra money I got from the 7,700 from the PERS benefit cost, I rolled that and a little bit more into water resources. And I know this is very limited, but I wanted to kick off a little bit of money in Peter's budget for the pre-licensing effort on FERC for the both New Hogan and North Fork. And we're gonna come back and revisit that in mid-year. Plus, Peter's got some projects that are gonna start right after July 1, and if there's project savings, he can reallocate those into this process. And I did speak to him, and we are gonna be coming back to your board later on this summer to talk about the FERC licensing process. But this would at least some seed money to get things going. I also reduced the sewer CIP program by about $35,000. The budget that was in the CIP was a full amount. This year, we've spent $35,000 that we're not going to be able to have to spend in 18-19. So it's just, the overall project total cost didn't change, it's just the allocation for 18-19. The revenue summary has not changed. Revenues have not changed at all. We're still looking at a 5.3% increase, about $834,000. Most of that is in rate revenue, and then we also have revenues in property tax. And in that case, we're looking at about $290,000 in additional property tax revenue over what was budgeted for 17-18, but it's not that significantly more than what we expect year end. We're looking at a little over a 5% increase over actuals. Transfers, we talked about this at the last meeting. Most of our transfers, the bulk of them come in to help pay the debt service for the R&R loans and the USDA Reach 3A bond loan. We do have money coming in also from the capital R&R project funds and CIP project funds out of expansion to pay for costs, staffing costs associated with those projects.
Could we back up a minute to investment income?
Yes, ma'am.
That's double.
Yes, it is. And if you've noticed, even the Fed has been increasing the Fed funds rate, and it just raised it up again 0.25% last week, and another 2 more increases. So that in turn raises the investment activity on the number of our investments, whether it's LAIF, which is running about 1.9, almost 2% now, and some of the bonds and other things. So our investment earnings are increasing.
As well as the cost will to borrow anything.
That's true, yes.
It's not really a good.
No,
Sorry,
Let's be happy.
sorry to break the bubble there.
at least we got locked in on some low interest rates on our
so,
current
you know,
loans.
To
Yeah.
your guys' credit, and I wish more people knew about all the refinancing efforts and
Right.
when money was so cheap. I mean, really, the district saved, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm very proud of that.
The other 2 transfers coming in are from the Interest Reserve Fund, Fund 108. $75,000 from unallocated interest to pay the interest on this building loan, and $370,000 to fully fund our capital outlay and equipment budget. $300,000 of that is going for a hydro excavator, which they use for making leak repairs and such. And it's also, as I'll bring it up later, it's part of our program that we have to do to replace our large diesel trucks. Because anything purchased before 2010, engines built before 2010, don't meet the Air Resources Control Board standards and have to be replaced by 2023. So we're moving along in that process. This expenditure summary is a little bit different than what it was in your agenda package. Mainly, the salaries and benefits and service and supplies have changed and a little over $7,000, $7,700 is what I mentioned. So the new budget is $19,144,822. This is for salary, benefits, service and supplies, capital outlay, debt service. Capital outlay and debt service is exactly the same. It has not changed from last week's presentation and your budget package. Here's our capital outlay request. As I mentioned, we're requesting $300,000 for the hydro excavator. We're looking for 4 replacement vehicles, a snow ATV, and PRV volts down at Copper Sawmill. And that's PRV and volts themselves. It's a combination. And handheld meters, which we talked about for the meter readers. Ours are obsolete. And an antenna replacement for here at this facility to improve our reception for Comcast. That's how we get our internet through the county.
So we're gonna put an antenna up to get Comcast?
We already have an antenna back here. We're going to get a different antenna to boost the speed that allows it to come from the county.
How much are they?
8,000.
We'll do it.
And part of that too is allow us to be able to be part of a communicate out to the guys in the field as well through the internet and through our system. So it's a combination thing. On debt service, one of the things I would like to point out, and this is that we paid off 2 loans this year. We paid off the capital R&R loan and the VACON loan, which is a good thing. It's always nice to get loans off the books. We also are going to be paying off the PERS side fund loan next April. That was a loan that we took out a number of years ago and refinanced, which Director Davidson talked about. It was costs associated with prior unfunded liabilities. They just kind of all rolled it up into one, called it a side fund loan at the time. They were charging us their discount rate, which is at the time 7.5% as our interest rate. We paid it up, we took out a loan through Umpqua, paid it off, and our rate through Umpqua was 2.98%. Again, we're saving money over time. And it matures next April, so you're gonna see the cost, that top line, go down $50-some thousand from prior year just because we have less payments to make. We do have one new loan and one adjusted loan on the books for next year. The adjusted loan is the admin building loan. We're going to start principal payments, and that is in the amount of about $570,000. We're going to start paying that down. It'll be over 5 years. And then the other is a sewer fund loan. This is a loan the sewer fund has to pay back to the water fund and other funds over time for the last several years' worth of running deficits. So it's basically paying back the water fund that's the portion of the water fund that's in the reserves. It's not our operating money. It's reserved money.
I have a question before you leave debt service.
Yes, ma'am.
Have any of the departments, or is there a need to seek another loan for some big?
Well, I think on the larger, well, that's something we talked about with the development of this budget. For one thing, was whether it made sense to buy the capital purchases, pieces of equipment. I think it was on the mini excavator, hydro excavator. I believe we were talking about whether we should finance that or we should just buy it outright. And that decision, it was made to, let's save on the interest and let's just buy it. I think going forward, I mean, what we anticipate is that the R&R sewer work down in the Copper area, with the improvements that have to be made at the plant, the treatment plant under our permit, I think those are the ones, particularly the additional storage that we need down there for treated wastewater is one that we probably won't be able to use with funds on hand, and we'll probably have to find some combination of grants and loans, maybe USDA, maybe through the state SRF funds, something like that. So that's the one that most aware of, given our recent CIP development. Jeff, I don't know if there's anything else that you've thought of or talked to anyone in operations staff about, or engineering, but.
In looking at this, Dave is correct. Our biggest funding needs are going to be on the CIP side. However, when I mentioned the replacement of our large diesel trucks,
Right.
as that comes along, we're going to have to look at possibly financing those. Jesse is working with Bob Carter, overseeing fleet, to identify those trucks that will not meet the new requirements, and identifying what the best process is to either A, replace them, retire them, or do we really need them? And this even goes for some of our off-road stuff. So we are going to be looking at that and developing a plan for over the next 4 years.
Okay, because I was gonna say, wait until April 2019, and then that, perfect timing.
Yes, and Director Underhill, you hit on something too, because what we try to do is if we retire one loan, it gives us capacity for another loan.
Right.
And so there very well may be an equipment loan, because that, if I remember correctly, that per side fund loan was in the range of $2 million or somewhere in that area, 1.5 to 2 million. So obviously, there's enough out there, but we have to get going before rates get too high.
Well, yeah, and that's the important thing, is we don't want construction costs and loans to go up at the same time, which typically do. So, I mean, we need to be forward-thinking out there and seeing what are some of the opportunities, because I would just assume perhaps, finance vehicles now at a lower rate than have to finance, a several $million project at a higher rate, or postpone it and then let construction costs, increase as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of little aspects to this thing. And maybe the vehicles is not the best example, but, interest is still historically low, but it's trending up. It doesn't turn on a dime unless, we have something catastrophic. So, I mean, I think that there's a big picture out there. As interest or as inflation occurs, the construction cost index goes up, and usually interest rates on financing goes up as well. So a lot of times it's better to bite the bullet and finance one of those construction projects now, as opposed to wait until we can afford to do it, because the construction costs can continue to rise, as the economy gets better. So there's a lot to it.
There is, and there's certain requirements we have to look at. One, if you do finance construction costs, some of them only give you a certain window to start the construction. The other, as Director Davidson said, interest rates are going up, inflation's going up. That's why the feds are starting to be a little bit more aggressive in bumping up the Fed funds rate. So that they're trying to make sure that doesn't get out of control. The other part is trying to balance your overall needs. So when we come back at later on this calendar year, what I'd like to be able to present the board is an overview of the truck replacement program, the large diesel truck replacement. Identify what they are, when we need to replace them, how we're going to replace them, and the scheduling, and what's the best deal we can get now versus waiting, because waiting will cost you more money. Plus, in addition to that, the cost of the equipment will go up too, and who knows, as equipment becomes, as more and more agencies are trying to scurry to meet that 2023 deadline, we may have difficulty getting some of our, those larger vehicles.
Jeff, in that analysis that you're proposing to do on these replacing the trucks, I suppose that an important aspect of that is if you wait until 2023 to replace the truck you're replacing will have little or no value. Is that correct? I mean, if the California Air Resources Board says that the truck can't be run on California roads, then who are you going to sell it to?
That's true. There is always a market for out-of-state.
Well, but we pretty much run them until they're,
Yeah,
until
exactly.
they're dead. I mean, a couple 100,000 miles, these things don't have much value anyway. I mean, that's, I think I'm not sure what our exact policy is, but, on some of these diesel vehicles, I think we don't even think about getting rid of them until they're in the 180s, you know?
Yeah.
And many times they can go farther, depends on the workload on that vehicle, you know, but, so, yeah, there isn't, you know, it isn't like we've got something that's really super marketable at the end of its, you know.
Yeah, at one time, didn't we say 125,000 was?
Those are on the smaller trucks. I'm talking the big trucks that is a replacement. It doesn't go to the pickup truck level. And what you're looking at, and the larger ones, are back-on trucks. Obviously, some of those that were purchased before 2010 are gonna have to roll off, and we'll run them till they die at that particular point. So, but there's probably very little market for those.
Yeah.
You know, Jeff, I mean, I think there's some really good information here, really good idea, Director Davidson, that we should be, I think, particularly with the larger loans on the capital R&R program side, really looking at them through the lens of where interest rates are headed and the cost to finance, and whether that may be a good reason to think about. We may want to kind of do a little further tinkering with the schedule on some of these projects if we you know, see that we really want to get in and go ahead and secure a loan, whether it's USDA or SRF or WINACT or whatever it is, so we can you know, get a 40-year loan at a better rate. You know.
And one of the things to remember, the capital R&R loans don't mature until March of 2021. So we have to be very judicious about how we take out our loans to meet debt service coverage ratios, and we can work with the lenders to make sure that we optimize that. The other part of it too, is in looking at this, is we're entering new territory when it comes to water revenues, consumption revenues. So by the end of this summer, we'll get a pretty good feel where our water revenues are going. I hope that I underestimated revenues. And that may be an opportunity for us to be able to utilize that extra capacity to take out some loans to do some of these water projects that Dave is talking about. And that when we get to water CIP, that we're not able to do because there's not adequate funding and we keep pushing them out. But perhaps if we have some of these revenues available, we can utilize that.
Well, as long as it's short-term return, because, you know, I don't think we should count on water sales over a, you know, maybe 6-7 year period, because the state is definitely, you want to talk about something trending, you know, the trend is that the government does not want to put any more money in for infrastructure, and they're gonna get usage down as low as possible.
Right.
That's a trend, and even now after the drought recommendations from the governor that we just went through, you know, we probably would never see them go up to, you know, old historic levels. Those days are probably gone. Now we got a new phase of that that's coming in, and again, it's going to affect people because they're going to market it as such, even though we have adequate water supply. Right. So I hate to think of a 40-year loan based on a short-term window of consumptive uses.
Right, but it could provide us the bridge we need to get to March 2021.
Yeah, no, that.
And so
understand that.
that's where it's going to take a lot of looking at all the different variables, using projections, because that debt coverage ratio is real critical to lenders. So if we look at things, and I agree with you, Director Davidson, it's going to be a challenge in future years to keep our water revenues up because of the state mandates. In the department summary, this is probably where you'll see the widest variations. No, Dave did not save $35,000 in his budget for this year. It was based, again, on how we allocate benefit costs, the PERS UAL.
Moving again.
No, it's not moving. It's, yeah, it's.
Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, it is.
But what it does, yes, it allows, it's a truer way of allocating the PERS cost based on the benefit group each person is in. Because PERS costs are based on your benefit plan, and I wasn't allocating costs that way, now I am. I'm not moving it from service and supplies up, it's just all within that, still within that benefit range. Some of the bottom line here is we are increasing our costs by $592,000 over last year. the bulk of that comes from non-departmental. And that is the building admin, the admin building loan, start picking up the principal on that. Something
And we're paying that back to the funds that we borrowed it from. Just so everyone knows, we're paying that back to connection fees,
Right.
assessment districts and stuff
I
like
know
that.
you
yes,
made that very clear that we borrowed internally. We
Right.
didn't
Yes.
go out.
and it's going to the expansion funds for which we borrow.
And that $500,000 would be going to a bank if we hadn't done it like that, or the USDA, because we, at that time, had we did have a USDA loan secured. So I'm very happy that it's actually going back into the loan district with, 3%?
2.5.
2.5%.
So we've been paying, the expansion funds have been getting money, being paid interest, so yes, it's all internal. Board of Directors, your budget will be going up just over $1,000 for next year. However, the reason for that is this item,
Seniority bonus?
yes, for the longest standing member of the board.
Yeah, I get another $2
Oh,
a meeting.
that,
Here's your bonus, Jeff, 11,500. We added money for this upcoming election,
yeah.
and
Plus
so,
the Corvette.
for 3 seats. That was not in the budget for last year. So that's the reason why your budget is going up. I cut your materials and supplies, which is meeting cost budget, down to $250, down $250. I know it's not much, but remember we went through.
We are using less tape on our mailings this year so far.
Which I think is a great thing.
Packages are easier to get
They
into.
are, it used to be hard. That's a good check mark.
If you remember, this past summer, when we looked at our funding gap as part of the rate study, we identified areas where we can save money. Where you gave us, we had to cut 20% of the gap by cutting expenses. And 2 items that were on that list were the materials and supplies, and also you're reducing your training, conference, and travel costs by $10,000. I did increase the other travel costs. This is mileage reimbursement because there has been a little uptick in the costs associated with board members going to different meetings. But all in all, there's an increase of $1,099 over fiscal year 17-18. That'll go back down in 19-20 because there's not going to be 3 seats up for reelection. I believe there's 2 at that point.
Well, as far as the other travel costs, that's fine because remember, we did reduce the number of meetings we could go to, so,
And that, a lot of those, yeah, the other travel costs, yes. In looking at where we are year-to-date, and that could be on page 5 of your budget handout, not the PowerPoint, but this budget here. Year-to-date, and this is as of year-to-date, meaning May 31st of this year, and again, it's page 5. You have spent $11,544 on a $25,000 training and conference budget. I'm estimating it's going to be somewhere to around $13,000, maybe a little bit more by year end. So I don't anticipate a problem by staying under a $15,000 budget.
We could work on that.
I think it's fine. That's a good example. We're reducing our costs as
What
directors.
percentage of our budget is that?
Jeff, I noticed in the general management department, we do have a entry for elections, which is 0, and has been for each and every year, I guess, in the recent past. So I just wondered if that's, is there an option to put the elections cost within either the general management or the board of directors, or is that?
It's a board of director cost.
Okay. I'm just trying to imagine what the other elections would be that would be beyond the board of board of director seats.
There, this particular format is, I have the same spreadsheet, same number of lines
Oh, okay,
for
gotcha,
each
gotcha.
department.
Okay.
And I don't always hide all the lines that have 0 entries in them. That way, everything tends to be linked and gets to roll up easily. Any questions on the board's budget? Or should I say your budget?
Go ahead. I'll-
No, this is always your comment. It's .008 of the
Overall
budget. There shouldn't even be a whole page on it.
Okay.
Look how much money you could save.
Yeah.
The budget for general management, which includes the general manager, the clerk of the board, and HR and related expenses, is going down $35,769. Congratulations, Dave.
Jeff, I'm sorry, I do have a question, and it relates to potential costs and all. So if we have a resignation, for instance, and then we've got to go through the process of getting somebody to replace a director, are there costs associated with that budget, with that? And if so, what are they? These are some of the unforeseen kind of things, or a recall, or whatever, you never know. I mean, this community's kind of getting out there a little bit.
It would fall into this category, Board of Directors, Services and Supplies. The cost would be associated with that. If there's public noticing of such as putting out a notice for people interested in filling an empty seat, it would get charged to the Board of Directors budget. That would be something we would charge, and technically it's called advertising, and it would be in the local newspapers. Those type of charges would apply to it. If there's,
And what usually are those? I mean, under $1,000?
yes.
Yeah, and that's why, and it's certainly the option of the board as far as whoever's remaining on the board, whether to call a special election or to appoint someone. And the choice has been, at least what I understand of our experience by directly, and then what I understand from the recent past, was to always do an appointment just for that just to avoid that cost.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly. Back to general management. This particular budget benefited greatly from the reallocation of the PERS UAL. And that's the majority of the decrease that you see. When you go to page number 7 of the budget, I'm sorry, page number 6 of the budget, and especially if you go over to the right-hand column, the second to the last column where it says variance to budget 2017-18, you can see the changes to the budget, not only dollar-wise, but to the right percentage-wise. I tend to look less in percentage because it all depends on the size of the different numbers. I'm looking at the dollars itself. We have a $2,000 decrease in materials and supplies. What we've done here is we've moved out a lot of the safety and first aid purchases out of general management into non-departmental. We have AEDs that we purchase, so if somebody has a heart attack or something, we have the equipment. One's right here, right around the corner, on the other side of the door from the kitchen area, and there are replacements parts for those. So that's where we've decided to put those in non-departmental, because it's a cost associated to every department. We also adjusted the professional services budget by $20,800 to account for the following. There's a rollover of a study, the compensation study that you've talked about. Part of it is it was originally budgeted in fiscal year 17-18. It's not going to be completed by the end of this month, so we had to add a little bit into next year's budget for it. And that's part of it. The other is $35,000 for an organizational study. Director Davidson, you brought this up as to how are we best going to utilize our assets, particularly in utilities. Where do we need bodies? What do we need to accomplish whether it's leak repair, running the plants and maintaining our equipment, whether it's electrical, those type of things. That's what this is for, to make sure we have the right bodies for the right jobs.
Excuse me, on dues and memberships, does that include Aqua and AWA and?
Yes,
Oh,
it does.
And Aqua's dues are based on your
Budget.
total budget?
Yes. So if I cut the budget in half, maybe our fees will go down.
Please try.
The other big change is in training, conference, and travel. I added some money there, $3,400. Most of that is for this young lady sitting here to be trained for being a board clerk. There's ethics training, there's notary training, there's all the requirements to be a board clerk through CSDA and others that we're going to provide to Rebecca. Although I have to admit, I think Dave will second that she's catching on very quickly.
And you'll have a good time.
So what positions then are included in the general management category?
We have the general manager, the board clerk, the HR manager, and the HR analyst. We do have some of the costs associated with the Director of External Affairs and legislative work. And that'd be Joel's work. Some of his costs that are associated with legislative affairs, travel, or any associated contracts or things to fall within that area.
And we have several employees that are funded because they're doing multiple jobs, that they're being funded in different categories.
Joel is basically the only one that has his, the hard costs, not his salaries and benefits, but the costs associated with attending meetings or those type of things for that outreach or legislative work.
So it's 4 full-time
Yes, sir.
positions, thank you.
That is down from prior years.
Yeah, I remember with Larry Diamond and all that.
That is correct. On to administrative services. This budget is going up a little over $10,000. Salaries and benefits, obviously, is the benefit portion is a big part of it. Services and supplies are going down, and capital outlay is going down. I may get into too much detail here, so please tell me when to jump over things. I basically, in your PowerPoint presentation, went over a lot of the number of changes, and this is on page 7 of your budget handout. I did add $2,300 into the budget for service maintenance contracts. These are contracts that we have with software companies and copier companies to be able to maintain our equipment. Since we're buying new handhelds for the meter readers, we do need to re-up our software service maintenance contract with Census, and that's what this is for. IT budget is in admin services, so a number of the IT costs, even though they may be attributed to other departments, falls within this area, so we can control them and know what's being spent. We're increasing computer licenses by a little over $1,100 to provide voicemail to email conversion software, and that includes some of the startup costs. The accounting auditing budget is increased by $6,400 for contract increases. The agreement we had was staged increases over the 3 years of the agreement, plus with the new GASB 68 reports that are required for the audits. We have to buy them from the state. They send it to us, and it's for PERS. We're required, and they give it to us, and we get charged for it. Plus, then our auditors have to use them, And this is all talking, the new GASB requirements regarding unfunded liabilities in our PERS costs, our retiree benefits. However, we did reduce professional services by 79,000. Some of that was based on the rate study being completed. The GASB 75 study, which is the retiree health evaluation, I've got that in there. They're putting the finishing touches on that. And we've reduced some of the outside IT support.
Excuse me, you have nothing for water conservation?
That is in water resources budget.
Oh, okay.
When Joel moved over into that area, he took the water conservation budget with him.
Because I'm thinking all of the information we're getting from the state, and so, of course, we've got to be ready for that.
Yes.
Why is the bad debt expense on that page? I'm just curious.
Because it falls under finance, administrative services.
Okay.
That's when we send things out to collection. We have to write it off as soon as it goes to collection.
Oh, I was thinking this was on the management. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I apologize for the confusion, but I don't delete all the the empty lines. We decreased training and travel by 1,500, but we did have to increase our merchant credit card cost by $11,000. This is what we pay Paymentus. Paymentus is our online billing system where people can go in and make payments, or they can call up, use the IVR. It's reduced the number of phone calls and transaction that goes through customer service, but we do get charged per transaction cost.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, I don't want a big giant presentation about that, but I mean, it would be kind of nice to, because, you know, when we see expenses go up, you know, we want to see on the other end that the promises that were made and less staff time and things of that are actually coming to fruition. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a short report on how that all is working out, you know.
Certainly. We've got it down. Agent fees increased by $5,500. We pay Wells Fargo. They're our trustee that holds our investments, our bonds. You have to have somebody do that for you. Capital outlay budget, we reduced by $8,000. We upped our storage capacity on our servers this year, and it goes up and down. It's generally under $20,000 to maintain our computers and other hardware associated with it. This is not the small personal computers. This is the larger systems, because it's got to be in excess of $5,000 to fall in under capital outlay, or I'm sorry, more than 5,000. So all in all, our budget increased a little over 10,000.
Excuse me, back to your Paymentus.
Yes.
Okay, it increased, and what are we seeing as far as percentage-wise, online payments?
I don't have the transactional numbers with me, but we have seen a significant increase over the prior year. It's about $1 per transaction, so you're looking at probably 11,000 additional transactions from one year to the next. So that is rather significant.
Yes, because we've always talked about, you know, the older citizens not having access to online thing, and so you're telling me it's different.
It's growing. The use of it is growing. And again, it's also not just computers. It's somebody who calls up and says, I need to make a payment. They do the IVR, and they choose not to talk to a customer service rep. They go straight into this IVR.
They get that option. They
Yes.
get that option when they call.
Exactly. And that is also included in this transaction count. But when we have this presentation, we can break it down by online credit card payments, setting up for recurring payments, and also the IVR. And we can take a look at phone calls coming into customer service, the whole process.
Also, perhaps, during the rate hearings and saying, a lot of times what people still don't realize that they can make a payment every month if they choose to do that. So maybe a presentation on if that's happening, and then perhaps some strategy to get that out to the public, that they
How-
can,
How easy it is to
they
set
can break
that
their
up,
payments
yeah.
up into a monthly scenario if they like.
If
Yes.
it's easy, I don't know.
Certainly.
And is there a way to document then the savings in staff time going to this type of system? Because I think that's why we're really trying to push it, not only convenience for our customers, but also to save on telephone time.
We can look into that and have that as part of the time per call that we tend to save.
I realize it's an estimate. but
It
still.
is.
Yeah.
One of the things that, one of the things that we did implement just recently was an upgraded phone system that provided us better reporting numbers. Problem is, we didn't really have a benchmark to compare it to. But we do now, and moving forward, we can look at the number of calls that comes in each day and so forth.
Yeah, and as well as we had talked about, a big part of the goal was so that we wouldn't be having to handle routine calls where someone doesn't need to really ask questions and get information, so that we have the staff, customer service staff, have more time to spend with the people who really do, to give them better information and really address their concerns. So looking, as we go into implementation of the new rates, that's going to be really important, to have them able to spend that time. So that's one of the things we'll collect whatever information we can to talk about that with the presentation.
Any questions on admin services?
We're talking about really kind of stepping up our game, so to speak, as it gets in relationship to the disadvantaged communities and providing customer support, economic customer support options, or at least looking into that. What have we budgeted for that? Or is that's on next year's budget? But again, I want to hold folks' feet to the fire, so to speak, the commitments that we made on those public outreach events, that we're going to move very quickly on ratepayer assistance programs. So,
Correct. At this particular point in time, most of that time is in personnel time, the staffing time to develop the programs. And once we develop that program, depending upon the direction your board and staff present, what are we going to need to do outreach? Some of the outreach really doesn't cost us much money. It doesn't cost us much money to put additional things on the website and so forth. We can absorb that. If there's hard dollars associated with it, we just don't have those at this point. But that program development will identify those costs.
okay. Thank you.
And when will we hear, or, how soon can we anticipate something like that?
To have that program, well, our commitment is to develop the program by the end of this calendar year. So that's something that would be coming to you, I would expect. We'll start working on that with the community and the board in a matter of a few months.
Moving on to engineering. There's a very slight change in engineering, about $7,300. Most of that was due in part to an under budgeting in last year's for salary and benefit costs. Otherwise, there really isn't any significant change in the engineering budget. There really hasn't been for years, because most of their work gets charged to CIP and capital R&R programs. However, this is where I had mentioned early on, with a rather aggressive capital R&R and CIP program, if we're going to move forward with that, you have to have the support in engineering to either design them in-house or manage the contractors, the engineering firms. So that's going to be something we're going to be looking at as we move forward, to make sure that we have adequate resources both in the engineering department, in inspections, and in the field to get these projects moving ahead. Our largest department in terms of budget-wise is utilities department. That's where we have most of our staff and most of the expenses. The increase in year over year is just under $275,000. That's a combination of several things. One, the benefit, the reallocation of the PERS costs, salary increases. Let me go back here. We did reduce service and supplies. Part of that was that funding gap reduction. And we did reduce our capital outlay by $50,000. So some good news. CPPA dropped their rates again. They're back down again. So we anticipate saving about $37,000 in electricity costs. Part of the funding gap reduction plan was reduce materials and supplies by $80,000. We're doing that.
What was the reason for the CPPA?
Their costs have gone down. And they, according to Peter, they've also rebuilt, they
Productions.
built up their
Yeah.
healthy reserves as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's delayed, but it's tied to the power production, of course, at Malonis, the federal hydropower project. And, yeah, that's the good news, is that the reserve funds, stabilization funds are healthy again, have been built back up, so.
Excuse me, I need a little
You know, that's
sustenance.
another thing, wouldn't be a bad thing to get another report, just on how their rates are established. I mean, is it just the price of power, or is there, you know, I honestly can't remember exactly what that formula is, you know, because it has had some, you know, pretty, not real huge swings, but certainly budget-worthy swings that we have to be concerned about. And, you know, it's just, I think it'd be a good refresher for the board to understand the history, and also just how their rates are established, you know, based on what factors.
Yeah, you bet. In fact, that would be a good one for Peter to present, as he's on the board, yeah.
And
What
obviously,
is the percentage now?
it's a cost, it's around, I believe it's 8 to 8.5 cents per kilowatt hour, 8.5 cents. One of the things that obviously created the swing, the tick upward, was the drought and the severe reduction of the New Maloney's reservoir, dropping to all-time lows. So that's that's one of the factors, but it's not the only factor.
Well, I think that there's, I mean, this is another one of those things that may trend differently with all the renewable energy, and then the price of hydro, you know, being less and less valuable. You know, I mean, you know, and then, you know, it's gonna be it may be a timing thing where we have to change our timing, and maybe we can work with, you know, the power agency to reduce costs anymore, just by when we pump, or things like that. I mean, there's, you know, I think we all would benefit from a little more knowledge.
Yeah.
I know I would.
Director Davidson, I just want to note that recently when I heard Commissioner Brenda Berman at Reclamation speak, she talked about the issue, the concern that if they get boxed out of the market in California with if the state truly goes to 100% renewable requirements, and big hydro does not qualify as green energy for that purpose, then that makes it economically impossible to operate some of these hydropower facilities. So that, you know, that's obviously would be a huge problem for us as well, because since we're a direct beneficiary of the power generation out of Malonis.
Yeah.
And the other component, which is not really known widely to the public, is the state's recent requirement that solar be added to every new home by 2020. And that's going to push downwards on hydro. But the other unintended consequences, those homes that don't have hydro are going to probably start paying more for electricity.
Jeez, if we could just get all the poor people out of the state, everything would be fine.
Well, there might be some opportunities if New Malonis, you know, yeah, I see that as opportunities too for others maybe to come in with smaller units that would qualify. And just have a changeover from Malonis and federal operation to more local operation of a unit or a series of units over there. So there might be opportunities. It's not always bad when the federal government gets thrown out of places.
No, but they're talking about 100% renewables and hydro not existing as a renewable. therefore not being economically viable in any size.
It's the size, well, see, my understanding, it's the size of the hydro facilities that really determines whether it's renewable or not. The large, massive ones, no, but the smaller ones may very well qualify.
Maybe. I like your optimism.
Yeah, every now and then I have some.
There's a number of changes in reductions and additions in the utilities budget. I'll go through them quickly. Some of these were just to put them in alignment with historical costs. Chemical budget went down 32,000. Service maintenance contracts reduced by 12,000. There were some additions and some deletions. We added 6,000 for backflow testing. We used to have homeowners do that themselves. That didn't work, so we're having to do it ourselves, but we also charge, so there was an associated increase in revenue side for this. We're required to do some increased groundwater monitoring, so we have additional budget for that. But we've reduced our hauling crane excavator budget by 18,000 and decreased paving budget by 13,000. Now, this paving budget is not associated with the R&R program. So when we do pipeline.
It's a leak repair thing, right?
Yeah,
So why would we anticipate decreasing that?
because over the last several years, we have seen a decrease in actual cost. And when we do the larger projects, the longer extended projects, that's under R&R now.
Right.
Professional services were increased, 13,000 for cross-contamination survey. Expenses, vehicle expenses have gone down by 23,000. At no surprise, we had to add $19,000 to water and sewer fees due to state increases in their fees. Everything from dams to just regular environmental fees. And all in all, the budget was, as I mentioned, was increased $275,000. And that details on page 9 of your budget package. Any questions before I move on to water resources?
Speaking of water resources, can we take a break? For about 5 minutes?
Okay, we'll take a short break. Let Jeff get another cookie.
Might as well take advantage of it.
Okay, we're back in session. Go ahead.
Thank you. We'll move on to water resources. As you can tell, there's a significant decrease under services and supplies, 141,000, which attributes to the overall decrease in the budget of 142,000. You can refer to page 10 of your budget package, and I will quickly go through the items of what has changed from last year. A number of these is projects that are completed. And in Peter's world and Joel's world, projects come and projects go. Sometimes you'll need more money, sometimes you'll need less money. And we did reduce materials and supplies by 30,000 as part of the funding gap reduction, but I added $20,000 back in for flow measurement devices on Bear Creek. Peter wants to get that done. He's working on the extension there. We decreased legal fees, outside legal fees by, actually that's only supposed to be 2 zeros, 6,500. Professional services budget was reduced by 90,000 by a combination of actions. We reduced the water resource consultant contract by 80,000, reduced funding for Bear Creek permit extension by 25,000 because of the work that's already been completed, decreased Sigma budget by 5,000 based on actual needs. We got into Sigma recently. We thought we would need some more money than we did last year. And added $9,000 for the FERC pre-relicensing efforts. Again, this is a start. We'll come back in mid-year in January to see where we stand, to be able to start setting up the reserve. But this is money coming in through the operating fund to help pay for this. Overall budget reduction of $142,626. Any
Jeff,
questions?
Yeah, question on the strategic plans updates and all. That's essentially professionals, consultants coming in and providing that expertise. I don't see a huge expense in, office supplies or whatnot. I mean, it's time
that.
of staff time.
Right, and part of that, actually, even though it was budgeted down there in strategic plans updates, it was actually charged in professional services this last year. The hazard mitigation plan,
Right,
the Moke River study,
right.
those are type of the AB 142. These are the type of the costs that generally come in and out of professional services. But it was predominantly the Moke River study that was down in strategic plans that ended up just getting charged to professional services.
Okay. Is there a better way to handle that to where it would all be under one budget? For instance, professional services, although that could vary everything from IT to water resources, or label that a little bit different way? I don't know.
It's more, it's 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other, as far as when you look at contracts with consultants, where you want to place them. Part of what you want to be able to do too is to kind of track year to year. In looking back, perhaps we should have charged the Moke River study to strategic plans.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it was not. It was charged to professional services. E-Core comes under professional services. Those type of costs, we fall under professional services.
So even though they're looking, for instance, at water rights or water availability, E-Core in particular, that's getting paid for out of professional services and not strategic plans.
Right. Part of what we are governed by and how we allocate costs is called the Gray Book. It comes out of the State Controller's Office. And they give general guidelines of how costs need to be charged, what particular counts. And that's our general guidelines, where we have some flexibility, but professional services is a standard one that's used everywhere.
Yeah.
And when I think of strategic plans and updates, I think of things that are on a periodic cycle, like urban water management plans and their update, things that you know is coming and is on a, every 5-10 years, these plans that you have to update. I would guess the reason we didn't put the Wild and Scenic report in there is because it was really a unique one-off type project that wasn't within that, something that we would typically do.
Right. And Dave is correct. When we look at the urban water management plan and some of those, yes, that's kind of more of a long-term strategic plan. Hazard mitigation plan would be under, in some cases, you can look at that under mandated plans, which it is, because it's required.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Jeff, I have a question about this reduction in the water resource consultant by 80,000. Can you elaborate on that?
That's John Mills' contract.
Okay, but we had previously reduced that significantly in last year's budget, so.
Yes, we did. And it went from 120 down to 80, and now we're eliminating that contract. Over the last 2 years, we have been utilizing Peter and Joel to work with him and get trained with what he does. And it was part of also that funding gap reduction plan.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions on water resources? The next and last department is what we call non-departmental. It's kind of where we put costs that are not associated with any particular department. One of Director Underhill's favorites. We put debt service here. Because debt service really doesn't belong to any particular department, so you have debt service in there. You have services and supplies, but as you can see, there's no salary and benefits. That will be on page 11 of your budget package. We see an increase of $477,000. That's mainly due to the recording of the 2 new loans, actually the principal on the building admin and then the sewer fund loan. Utilities, and these are minor changes, but I just thought I'd let you know to answer some of your questions, but some of these changes are related to the sale of property. When we sold the old building, admin building, we no longer have utilities associated with that. So when we sold the Highway 49, we no longer have utilities associated with that. So when we sell these properties, we free ourselves up of the utility cost. So we reduced the utilities budget, electrical, phone, sewer, those type of costs by $7,500 as a result of the sale of the old admin building. Down here under miscellaneous non-operating, we zeroed out that due to the sale of the Highway 49 property. That was our cost for sewer service down on that particular property. We reduced retiree employee costs by $13,000 based on actuals and our recent valuation. This is the cost for current retirees, what we have to pay to provide them retiree health. The cost of pre-funding for current employees is under the benefit side. Also, we reduced the budget for insurance because of lower Aqua JPIA premiums, and I just saw a picture of your board in the JPIA monthly magazine or quarterly magazine when they were presented the check for the refund check. So we are experiencing that as on an ongoing basis, so our costs are going down.
Yeah, and I told him we want to see him again this year.
That would be nice.
Jeff, you just mentioned some of the savings associated with the relinquishing the old building. This doesn't really have to do with budget, but are we still storing stuff in that boardroom over there?
No, we are not.
It's all gone, okay, good.
Correct.
Is it really sold?
Sold. Lock, stock, and barrel. Everything's gone.
Well, you need some asbestos?
The dollar's in the bank, I'm sure.
And the county bought it?
Yes, they did. And no, RC, I take that back. Our Resource Conservation District bought it.
With a loan from the county?
Well, no, they are actually, the county came in and did some renovations so they can
Right.
put a couple of their departments over there, I believe. Any questions on non-departmental? I just want to go back to debt service for just a moment, because these are things that really, I think, are accomplishments. The BBVA refunding and VACON loans, as I mentioned, paid off 17-18. The last payment on PERS side fund loan, April of 2019. We did, however, have to increase payments on the principal side on the water capital R&R fund, just to keep the debt ratio coverage equal, because we needed, the principal payments were higher in the last several years. $570,000 for the principal pay down on the admin building fund, which goes back to our expansion funds. The funding for the repayment of the sewer fund loan, just under $80,000. We chose 10-year duration for that. And at this particular point in time, there are no additional loans or debt service looked for in 18-19. However, that may change based on our needs, especially on the CIP side. So to summarize, as you're aware, we need to have a balanced budget, and we do so. We show a positive surplus of $3,457. That's broken down this year because we have to we do identify it by water and sewer fund, and that's, you can see that on page 1 of your budget package, which is the summary page, this page right here. And on the far right columns are the water and sewer budgets, and in the blue area shows the surplus about, although, you know, rather minor, but, you know, $1,900 surplus in water, $1,500 surplus in sewer. And that is something we have not done for many years, showing a balanced budget in the sewer fund. That is an accomplishment. We worked many years to get to, and that's gonna open up a lot of doors for state funding, state grants, everything on the sewer side, West Point, Wilseyville.
And have you had a conversation with the state folks or those about where we are now so they can reconsider, or?
I have not, but Joel and Charles has done some outreach to them.
What did we hear yesterday on that? I think since it happened just yesterday, we got an email.
Yeah, they've asked Joel to provide the documentation confirming the board's action on the rate setting that would, and showing that would make us then qualify financially. So that we're giving them what we hope is the last documentation, and I'm, fingers crossed, we get the green light on the grant within a matter of weeks is my hope.
Oh, nice, nice.
So the amount is not the issue. The issue is the fact that it's balanced.
Yes. And again, it's never been balanced since I've been here.
Sewer
Sewer
side.
fund.
Let's
Sewer side.
let's make that clear, the press is here.
I'm
The
sorry,
sewer
yes,
side, we've
sewer
had a
side.
balanced budget
Every year,
every year.
yes. I'm sorry, you were referring to the sewer side? Director, yes, thank you, Director Davidson. We've had balanced budgets every year. It has been a challenge, especially since the recession.
Jeff, I have a question, and this relates to the West Point Roosevelt project that you've got listed at $4,750,000. The way I'm reading this is an expected expenditure on the CIP budget, but if we in fact do get a grant for that amount, what is that, how will the numbers be adjusted?
It'll still be an expenditure because we get reimbursed after the fact.
Okay, so it would be a revenue source in some future fiscal year.
Correct, and that's under grants. I do have one more slide before we go on to CIP, and I can give you a little bit more information on
All
that.
right, thank you.
So we do have some ongoing issues we're facing. Limited growth in water and sewer customer base. As Director Davidson pointed out, the conservation requirements coming down from the state, PERS costs, need to continue replacement of the large diesel trucks. We need to make sure that we have reliable and perpetual funding for the R&R programs and sustainable long-term funding source for the North Fork and New Hogan FERC relicensing project. Nothing new. But I just wanted to make sure that as we move forward, we do have some long-term things we keep in mind, but we're going to be coming back and addressing those. The next item and the last item is our CIP budget for both the water and sewer side. If you look at your handout, and that would be starting on page number 31. I'm sorry, page 32, I take that back. Here are the CIP items for the water side. And I'm just using this as an example, the same thing we looked at last time. It's this area over here on the right, the funding levels. We have a number of projects in which we have not identified full funding for. And this is in a 3-year horizon and beyond. So what we're looking at here is a combination of loans, grants, or possibly deferring projects a little bit longer until we have those R&R funds catch up. Because as I mentioned, the last year of the loan in the water and sewer R&R is March 2021. So we'll get back additional revenues. In the water side, it's over $1 million a year extra in revenues that can be applied to projects that is currently going to loan payments. And on the sewer side, it's just under $400,000. So these are the challenges we're facing. However, for the next couple years, we have adequate funds to be able to fund these projects. But I wanted to just make your board aware of them, that as we look at these, we're not out of the woods, and we still need that consistent funding on the R&R side. The biggest one here that jumps out at me is the Jenny Lynn Tank AB transmission line, which engineering and utilities is already looking at workarounds to get us through the next 2 to 3 years until funding becomes available for the full project. So they're not saying we're not going to deal with it. We're just looking at different ways of handling situations. On the sewer side, I just wanted to remind your board that we did make I made a couple changes to one of the original budgets. There is $10,000 added to the total project cost for the La Quintana wastewater treatment rehab, taking it up to a total of $4,650,000. $650,000 of that is anticipated to be spent this year. That's already on a item that your board approved for this purchase of property that has been delayed at this particular point in time. Some of that additional $10,000 is more for administrative costs and closing costs that we have to incur. We also, as I mentioned earlier, reduced the Vallecito project by $35,000 to account for 17-18 costs. That has a direct impact on the fiscal year 18-19 sewer budget. It'll reduce it. We do have a couple of projects in the sewer side we have funding deficiencies, specifically these two down here that I want to point out first, which is in copper. And that's where we're hoping, now that we have balanced sewer budgets, that we are hoping to be able to qualify for either loans or low interest loans, or some grants to be able to handle these two items down in the copper area. The big challenge for us, though, is going to be in La Quintana. When we look at this particular project, as you can see, there's $4 million above and beyond the purchase of the land. That's for improvements. Some of those improvements are related to expansion. Unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of money in the copper or La Quintana expansion fund. So that's going to be a challenge on how we're going to stage things over time to be able to fund that project. It's just more of a challenge to get loans from institutions based on the possibility of future connections versus when you have rate revenues that are much more reliable. The total water and sewer CIP budget for next year, and this is cash flow for 18-19, $12,277,206. That's combined water and sewer. So if you look at the column, the blue column on page 13 and the green column on 14, adding those together, that's the total. And that's the end of my presentation.
So I'm just curious how long Steve Schultz would have taken. I'm sorry.
Steve Hutchings?
Hutchins, yeah, would have taken.
Director Davidson would probably be able to answer that better than I can, but probably within about 2-3 minutes.
He was good. Do you have any questions? Did you read your packet? Do you have any questions? Thank you, goodbye. Said it good. He was a good role model.
I would just like to request that next time we have a little bit more detail. So,
Certainly. I love
You
detail.
can,
I love getting, I love the
Scott will
minutia.
appoint you to the pre-detail committee.
Yeah, and I'll have a pre-meeting for us.
You are now the chairman of the pre-detail committee.
So,
Good job,
you know, I'm
Jeff.
just curious in, you know, as priorities come up and all, because we've been so successful historically in those disadvantaged communities of getting all this free money, although nothing's for free, would that move certain projects up higher in priority because we can get them done quicker because we have the funds given to us for that? Or, I mean, that's probably a catch-22, but in a balancing act.
You're right, it is a balancing act because, as you say, there's no such thing as free money, especially from the state or the feds. But they also put in requirements as to how fast you need to complete the project. So when you look at, if we borrow money, the lending institutions want to know how fast you're going to use the money. So we have to look at those lending and grant restrictions. Basically either bond covenants or letter of commitment and requirements there. We also need to also be flexible because if we have an emergency somewhere, we need to respond to it.
Right.
Now, in my mind, and this is just me personally, one of the things we have to also look at is the risk factor of not completing sewer projects. Because the cost of a sewer spill and out of compliance on that is so much higher than a water spill. So we look at the risk factor and the liability factor as well. So that's where Charles and Jesse, utilities and engineering come together and really focus on it. But when you have money available to do projects such as West Point, Wilseyville, pretty much the design is done. We just have to get the money in, get the term and conditions of the loan, review that and get that, go through the bureaucratic side of it. And we have the staff able to be project managers, then we can get going on it. But there's a lot of different variables when you look at a project like that, because trust me, the paperwork they require is significant.
No, yeah, I know.
And it's
And
never
that's-
ending.
Required.
Yeah, that's why, I mean, you really have to think about this at the front end before you may even make the application to make sure this is truly something that is, something we would, if we got it, we would be willing to begin that project right away. I mean, that's why with the application for funds under the Cal OES and FEMA for the Redwood tank replacement, that's a great example. I mean, that's something we want to make improvements to, and if we get the grant funding, that will then move up into a higher priority, because then we'll be on the hook to perform it. But we will come to the board with that if we're lucky enough to get that. We will come to the board and you know, share that with you and how that will affect the timing of our CIP program.
And just to follow up on no free money, we're just completing a single audit, our auditors on grants and programs from the feds, and a couple more $1,000, and you have to continue to do this. So, and it's required. So there are you have to look at the grant in totality and to see if it actually meets one of your goals, or are you just getting a grant to get a grant. And I think we're at a point now where every grant we get needs to make sure it accomplishes whether it's a short-term or long-term goal of the district.
And I think, Joel, we had talked about coming back, him coming back to the board soon to give you an update on the grants that staff are working on. He's a part of that.
It'd be good to have a little recent history on the amount of grants we've received, maybe in the last 10 years. I think that would be good public information as well.
It would. My only request of your board is to give me direction if you would like to, if there's going to be any changes to the budget, the preliminary budget as presented to you, and direction to come back next Wednesday for adoption with a Steve Hutchins-type presentation.
No, I see we got it is next Wednesday for the budget adoption. We'd like to see the full presentation again then, if we could.
And you know, I
You got a
believe,
mouse in your
Yeah,
pocket?
just
Can we also have a,
if you can get into a little more detail for Russ on all the
as
on the
well as,
spreadsheets.
election of new officers right before that?
certainly. One of the things I will be bringing back to you, which I did not include today, is a personnel allocation form, because you're going to be adopting that as part of the budget process. But I will not go through department by department, position by position, because the total number of FTE is not changing.
Aw. Okay, well, thank you, Jeff.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on our agenda is board reports, information, future agenda items. Start Director Strange.
I don't have any. It seems like it's in close proximity to the last board meeting, so, but thank
Director
you for the
Davidson.
opportunity.
No, I just want to thank everybody that worked on the budget. I mean, we just get to hear Jeff, but I know every department has gone through this and worked tirelessly to bring it forward, and so I just want to give everybody, an attaboy for bringing it to us the way they did, and it's a good work. Pass it on, please.
I will. It is a group effort.
Thank you. Director Thomas.
How much time do I have?
Too much time on your hands.
Yeah.
No,
For
I,
sure.
the most recent thing that I want to report on is we finally had a joint meeting with the county after a couple of false starts, and had a very positive meeting yesterday. Got some good report from Joel on the wild and scenic, the movement of that legislation. Apparently it's very close to being a done deal with the language that the district wanted, and so everybody has a smile on their face, county representatives and CCWD representatives. So anyway, hopefully that'll be taken care of.
Director Thomas, just a note on that, one follow-up on that as well. We did learn that the county will be moving forward, I believe it's first or second meeting in July to approve a contract with Mia O'Connell to represent them as well.
Oh, great.
So we will have our plan is to then begin working together with the county and with Mia to kind of do our joint planning for our legislative advocacy.
It was really an excellent thing to hear them report on that. Brian Moss will begin to attend the meetings on the county side, and that's probably a step in the right direction too. So that's about all.
Wait a second, why Brian Moss?
He's the assistant to Tim Lutz, so he's going to be involved as well. He's not taking his place, he'll just be in addition, he'll be attending the meetings also. We also talked about having
So that doesn't sound good.
Donna Leatherman from CPUD, as we've also asked her to be involved in those meetings as well.
So that concludes my report.
Director Underhill.
Okay, I have a couple of things. Highway
Thanks,
4, make it quick, is that what you said?
No, I said bake sale, like where?
Highway 4 construction is back on, right up above by the state park, that entire section. What they're gonna do is gonna run from June through November, so get ready, Jeff, you'll be stopped.
I haven't been up to my cabin in a year, but I need to go this weekend.
Yeah, okay. Well, anyway, what it's gonna look like is exactly how the highway is going towards Bear Valley. You remember all that construction that they had up there that ran them, I don't know, $3 or $4 million? That's what Big Trees State Park is gonna look like, or that area. Okay, and then here's the biggie. The 14th Annual Arnold Classic Car Show is going to be held at White Pines Park. It's moved from Cedar Center, it's gotten that big. So they've done all their paperwork, and the paper is there for Dave to sign, because the county, they went through the county and everything, they have insurance and what have you. That's July the 21st from 10 to 4, so new venue, White Pines Lake Park, White Pines, California. There'll be hundreds of cars there.
Great.
Okay,
Anything else?
that's all.
Okay, night, I have nothing to report. Our next board meetings are Wednesday, June 27th, 1 PM in this room would be our budget adoption, and then Wednesday, July 11th, 2018, and this meeting's adjourned.
What is the status of that bridge that went over to the Moose Lodge thing right there by White Pines? Did
It's-
that get all constructed and all fixed and?